Welcome to Finding Home Healing. I'm your host, Sadie. I believe you were born with a light that guides you to your higher self and most passionate life. But for many of us, it's been extinguished or lost. My mission is to help you find your way back home to that light so that you can love deeper, live in your power, and truly thrive. For those lost or lonely souls, welcome home. Have you ever felt like you've dealt with imposter syndrome, or like you were not good enough, like you can't measure up in your life or move on to the next step, whether it's in relationship or your career or your family life, being a mother, father, or anything else, even in your healing path? Has it ever felt like you've just been stuck and like you're an imposter, you don't know what you're doing, you're not good enough to do what you want to do? Any of those resonate with you? This episode today is like part 2 of my story. In my first episode, I go through a high-level part of my story that's like my hero's journey. And while I had to leave quite a few things out, I really wanted to weave that narrative that I've overcome a lot of trauma and a lot of events that were very traumatic and how those impacted me. I've healed in so many ways, shapes, and forms, and I got my light back. It was something that I was born with, and all of that trauma and all those events really took it away. It extinguished it. And through my hero's journey, I was able to get my light back. That's something that I want to illustrate again today, how you can get your light back and stop all of these impending or pervasive problems or issues or challenges that you might have not stop you anymore. How you can come back home to your light and overcome things like imposter syndrome, unworthiness, feeling not good enough, like you can't amplify your voice, you can't speak your truth, you can't put yourself out there. And this doesn't just mean like to the public, this also means to yourself, to your loved ones, to people just in your everyday life. I went through a journey and I'm still on it. I am no means by no means am I perfect. I don't have it all figured out. Even though I've overcome so many things and in my hero's journey, I have done that whole arc a couple of different times. It doesn't mean that it's over. And it doesn't mean that my struggle is complete or that I'm a perfect person and that I've enlightened and that I'm God. Okay. So I don't want to give that impression. But I have had a lot of struggles that I have overcome, and I want that to be like a beacon of light and hope and truth for you to also know that if you're struggling with certain things, if you feel like your light's out, if you've been through really challenging, hard, traumatic things in your life, I want my story to empower you to know that it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to let those things stop you or hurt you any more than they already have. And you can bring back your power into your life. You can find your light. Okay, so in this episode, I really want to go through how I overcame my imposter syndrome and feeling like I wasn't good enough, and a lot of the doubters and haters that I have had to deal with. And I'll be completely, totally honest and transparent. I still very much struggle with it. It's something that I wouldn't say I combat it, but I do have to overcome it on a continual basis. It's not something that I just heal and I do release work and it's done and it's over. It is something that requires me to continue to come back home to myself, come back home to my light over and over and over again, and remind myself that I am the way that I am who I am, and all of the positive, loving, high vibrational things about myself and about the work that I do. Because I will tell you what, there are definitely forces in this world that will try to snuff the light out. It will try to extinguish it. It will try to take it away from us. It will do anything in its power. At least this has been my experience, that for me in my life, it's done everything in its power to make it such that I didn't share my message, that I didn't amplify my voice. And even recording this podcast, I have had so many obstacles to overcome, and I'm so grateful that I have been able to overcome them, and I'm here now talking to you about this. Okay, so my imposter syndrome and, my light being extinguished has many layers to it. So like I said, episode 1 talks a lot about the trauma that I went through and the really intense hardships that I had to face. In today's episode, I want to go through how I started off my journey of helping people. The number one important thing that I needed to do was help myself, right? Anytime we want to help someone else, we better look to ourselves and we better look inside. If we are ignoring ourselves or thinking that we have it all figured out and that we're perfect and, everyone just needs to be like us, even though we haven't done any of our own internal work, we haven't looked at our own shadows, looked at our own beliefs, our own negative emotions, or just our own baggage, our own stuff, then that's like a charlatan, I guess I would call that. And that doesn't mean that if you're still on the journey, which I believe that all of us are, myself included, it doesn't mean that if you're still on the journey, you can't help people. But it means that it's important that you somewhat do it in tandem, or that you really commit to yourself first before helping other people. That's what I did. I knew from a very, very young age that I wanted to help people and that was my driving, motivating force in my life. I knew that I was here to help people in some way, shape, or form. Now, that's a really big idea and a big concept. So I didn't know exactly how to do that or what kind of education to get to do that. My gifts, as I explained in my episode 1, are very intuitive, and there's not a lot of mainstream acceptance of those things. They're becoming more and more acceptable and known, even especially through channels like TikTok. But those types of things in my youth were not accepted. They were, in fact, looked down upon a lot of times, and it was something that was starting to become a thing, but that not a lot of people knew about or accepted. So I ended up having to go down a traditional educational path. There was a part of me that really thrived in a business world, and I grew up, how your parents always ask you what do you want to be when you grow up? And I always made my parents chuckle because I'm I want to be a CEO. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, an owner of a business, the leader of a business, and I always had those sights set on my future. And so I did go down the traditional path of getting an education in business marketing with an emphasis on the psychology of marketing, because I was so obsessed and fascinated with people's behavior and how their brains worked and why certain things worked and why certain things didn't, and how to get to a person from a psychological perspective. So I studied a lot of psychology in tandem with my marketing degree. I ended up graduating early. That was all great. I went into real estate, and in my story in episode 1, I was working in real estate before I got my traumatic brain injury, and that was the job that I lost. I was being groomed to be the top agent in all of Hawaii because I was working underneath one of the top agents, and he wanted me to become him. So he was training me, and I was working in his team to essentially be a duplicate of him. And then that traumatic brain injury happened, and my whole life changed after that. I ended up going down the path of finally deep diving into healing myself. I had done some stuff earlier the years prior, but I finally decided to fully commit myself to that healing process. And through that journey, I started obviously realizing oh my gosh, I need to fix a lot of this stuff before I feel capable of helping people. So even though I had this drive, this internal fire and motivation, and just a knowingness, an intuitive knowingness that I was here on this planet, on this earth to help people, I knew that I had to go through this journey first. And I think that that's part of imposter syndrome, when you feel that it's coming on really strongly, you are... Well, and I should caveat this, imposter syndrome often has to do with not feeling like you're good enough, not feeling like you're capable. There's some limiting beliefs behind the experience of imposter syndrome. So when I work with a client, I'm having to dig and find, are you believing that you're not good enough? Do you feel like you're unworthy of certain things? Are you believing you're not capable, you don't have the skill set? And sometimes those turn into what's called schemas, that those are indicative of schemas, which are maladaptive patterns that you develop in childhood, early on in life, that are stories that run inside of your conscious and unconscious mind telling you that these things are true, when in actuality, they're not true. So if you have these schemas or these maladaptive type stories running in your programming, then a symptom like imposter syndrome will show up. And that's what was happening for me. And this is what happens with a lot of people that I find are dealing with imposter syndrome. There's this story in the back of our head that's like, I'm not good enough. I can't do that. People aren't going to accept me. I can't do what I should be able to do. I don't have the right license. I don't have the right education, this, and this. Okay. There's like, it can go on forever and ever. And that was what was happening for me. I loved helping people. I was very intuitive. I could download information. If people asked me stuff, I often had like a very wise approach to helping them, even though I was really young. And I kind of had that reputation in high school. Some of my close friends, they're like, you're so deep and you always have such interesting insights about life and all of this. But when I was healing from my traumatic brain injury and really deep diving into a lot of my childhood trauma, I went down the path of like personal development. And that was in and of itself a little bit triggering, because at the time I was really close with my sister, who was wrapping up and finishing her medical degree. She was becoming a naturopathic doctor. And for her, she had to go through 8 years of traditional schooling in order to get her degree. And for me, I never felt called to go down the traditional path. Yes, I got an undergraduate degree, and yes, I studied traditionally psychology in some capacity, but past that point, I never felt like traditional education, like getting a master's in social work or a PhD in psychology or psychiatry or any of those other fields. It just never felt right to me, and I had to honor that inside myself. So still to this day, that's something that the imposter syndrome will bring forward, because I've had tons of people in my life that are all doctors and they have their masters and they have all these different things from a traditional perspective. But that just wasn't my path. And I had to honor my path. If I didn't, then I would have gone off path. And I maybe wouldn't be here today speaking to you about this. So again, that's another thing that I think is very important if imposter syndrome is coming up for you. And if you're feeling like you're not connected to your light, you might be off your path. If you're not honoring what's true and what your soul is calling you to do, then you will not be connected to your light, and you will experience your schemas, these maladaptive patterns of I'm not good enough and I can't do it, much more intensely. When you're on your path, and this is my personal belief system, so if you disagree with this, that's totally cool. But for me, when I'm on my path, those things, yes, they rear their ugly heads, but there's always like a little peephole through them. And it's like a wormhole that you can just like jump through and you get to the other side. Because ultimately at the end of the day, your soul has a plan. It's like, I want to do this. I need to do this. I have to honor my soul and do what is in alignment with it, what's in alignment with myself. So I ended up getting what I like to call my PhD in non-traditional educational routes, right? I started after that brain injury, like really, really deep diving into learning all this stuff. So it's been about 6 or 7 years of my education, like fully going on a deep dive that again was not traditional, but in my personal development program, we learned a ton of stuff while we were healing our own selves. And I started studying with different therapists, different psychologists, seeing them to help me, and also with the intention that I would share with them, like, I want to learn simultaneously how we're healing me and how I can do that for other people. Because again, like, I have nothing against the traditional education system technically. However, I do have a personal opinion going through my experience of college that there's a huge emphasis on the education being you read, you watch PowerPoints, you listen to a lecture, you have to remember it, memorize it, and then regurgitate it on a test. And to me, that's not my learning style. Sure, I have like a somewhat photographic memory. I can memorize things on a page. Prior to my brain injury, I had a great memory, and I could remember stuff so easily. And so I could take tests and pass them, but I wasn't really like absorbing the information, mostly because I wasn't passionate about a lot of it. So it would kind of just go in one ear out the other. And also because that's the strategy. It's like you have to just memorize facts or memorize information. You have to do PowerPoints and presentations about things that you really don't care that much about. At least this is for me, because it wasn't my passion, and then you just have to regurgitate it. That's not how I learn. I am a go or learn as you do type of person. I like to be hands-on, and while I like to have like a concept and the what and the why of a certain situation, I'm a very how learner where like I like to get my hands in it. So I decided to learn how to help people through how I helped myself. And I had tons of mentors. I saw spiritual healers. I worked with someone who's very near and dear to my heart who taught me how to be more in touch with my intuition and how to meditate to a certain degree when my vibration like skyrockets and everything turns to white around me, and how to send that energy to other people that I'm working with. There was not like a strict step-by-step, like this is the semester that you have to learn this, and this is the semester you have to learn that. My education and what I believe now makes me so credible in what I do and how I help people is because I feel it. It's inside of me. It's like programmed inside of me, not only because of how I helped myself heal in so many ways, but because of how my brain works and how I could take that information that I would learn in books and through all my mentors and through all my programs and throughout all of my education, and then apply that with people that were sitting in front of me. Now, I did that. I like went full on and I started working with my sister's patients because I was helping her build her practice. And I would see clients just strictly based off of my intuition. I would have intuitive sessions with them. I would be able to pick out what it was that they were struggling with, where their negative energy or their limiting beliefs or negative emotions, what they were and where they were coming from. And I would help them start shifting them. At one point in time, I called myself a shiftologist, which was really silly and cute looking back now, but it was true. Like my passion was to be able to help people shift from one state to another state. And I was doing that for a while, and I kept, and one of my episodes when I talk about NLP, I talk about part of the story where I kept getting drawn to this branch of psychology that's pretty esoteric that some people may know or may not know, to learn more about psychology, to learn more about how to help people. It was such a strong calling, which again, I needed to honor that experience, that I was having this draw and this magnetism toward this thing. So I ended up going and getting more education in neurolinguistic programming. And that was a hugely, immensely helpful piece of my education, because I was able to become an integrative practitioner with integrative psychology. I learned healing tools and modalities like mental and emotional release, timeline therapy. I went even deeper into spiritual teachings like Huna, which is the ancient Hawaiian process for healing and for understanding energy and how to move energy. If you're familiar with Reiki, it's kind of like that. Not really, but it gives you some sort of a context. But Reiki is obviously a different culture. This is the Hawaiian culture. I was always very, very drawn and connected to Hawaiian culture. So I listened to that inner call and honored myself. And even though I started already working with clients, I'm like, this could only help me. So I'm going to go down this path. And I ended up loving it and learning so much about our perception and about things like cause and effect, how we are at cause for a lot of things that happen to us in our life. No, we are not the cause of like 9/11, but we are at cause for how we respond to certain events, which is why in episode 1, one of my 3 things that I've taken away from what I believe is that we have a choice to respond to things that happen to us. We might not always be in control of what happens all the time, but we are in control of what happens to us post something happening to us, aka how we respond and what we choose to do with it. So this part of my education was very, very empowering, and it was very helpful to have more of a framework and a context around things that I had already begun to know intuitively, but I was getting so much validation from my teacher in integrative psychology and through neurolinguistic programming that I was like, oh my God, this is exactly where I need to be. When we're going through a process of like imposter syndrome, where maybe that story is like, I'm not good enough, or I'm unworthy, like I can't measure up to it. When we listen to those calls and those magnetisms and those messages, it leads us down a path that helps us get what we need in order to, for lack of a better term, combat some of those schemas, some of those maladaptive stories that we have inside our head. And so as I gained more and more knowledge and wisdom through integrative psychology, then I felt even more empowered to be able to help people in so many different ways. And it opened up my toolbox. So past that point, at this point in time, like I never watched TV. I didn't watch movies. I was rarely on my phone, like doing social media. I was reading books. So that's why I say like I have a non-traditional PhD in life and in experience, because every time that I felt like my personal journey was leading me to a certain apex of learning something, or that I was struggling with something, like in some of my relationships romantically, I went through so many struggles and a lot of trauma through that. There were good things that came out of it because I learned so much about myself and about what to do in certain situations. But I was learning through books, and like I said, all these mentors, I was seeing them constantly. Like my whole life revolved around this healing process. And so, yes, I do today believe that my experience and how I can help people congruently is because of the combination of all these different things. Am I the most brilliant person who does a bunch of research and writes big long papers in a PhD? No. But am I somebody who constantly is thinking about how things work and how people are the way they are, and reading books and watching podcasts and videos, and even studying with Jordan Peterson, all of his lectures that he's posted that have been really helpful. It's things like that I've just pulled all together, and I've created my own integrated way of how I help people. So sometimes that works for people and sometimes it doesn't. Honestly, like I've had people come to me that are like, oh, you don't have a master's in family therapy. Sorry, like I have to work with somebody who has that. And I'm like, okay, great. Like that's totally cool. If that's what you need, that's what you need. That's not who I am. That's not what I have to offer. So please go get what you need. And some people love the fact that I'm not, in that world, because in a lot of ways in traditional therapy, I have clients that come to me that are like, I've tried CBT for years, or I've been seeing a therapist and I'm not making any progress. Like nothing's changing. The needle's not moving. I need something different. And I'm like, well, welcome. I am something different. And they end up getting a lot of help and healing from the work that I do. So if you're somebody who's really stuck on labels and needs someone to have the fancy like degree and the certificate and all of those different things, my messages and who I am, it might not resonate fully with you. But if you're somebody who really loves that and is really inspired to, trudge a different path, like walk by the beat of your own drum, and you've always kind of felt like the black sheep, and you really want to overcome certain things and actually heal and get better, then my messages and I might be a really resonant fit for you. So I definitely wanted to cover today, like what my training has been in, and how I got my light back through, the wormhole of that imposter syndrome. And as we've discovered so far, like I studied and learned a lot on my own, like my self-study and reading tons of books and having tons of mentors, teachers, going through a bunch of different programs. I am certified as an integrative practitioner in neurolinguistic programming and in integrative psychology, also in mental emotional release, MER, and hypnosis, and in HUNA. So I do have, certifications. I'm not like, somebody who's still on her path trying to just figure it out in my head. Like I went down that path, and I do have those things, which I am very grateful that I was able to get both. I integrated both. I have what some people consider like that traditional type of education, but through a non-traditional route, which was really, really helpful and exciting for me. And that's ultimately really what I love to do when I help people. I combine things. My biggest message is that in order for us to find our light, in order for us to live in our light, we have to integrate things. We have to bring things together. We don't want to cut things off of ourselves or remove things too hastily. We want to bring things together. And that's really a big message that I have. When we get into how I got my light back and how I help other people do the same, it's through these means. I developed a process that I like to call a rapid transformation process, where I combine both my intuition and my education and my healing tools that I've learned together. So on top of like the psychology, the neurolinguistic programming, the MER, the HUNA, and all of that, I've also learned other modalities like tapping and EFT and emotion code. And, I have gone deep into learning psychotherapy and how our very early years form us and shape us, and how our relationship with the masculine, feminine, the mother, father impact how we experience ourselves as the masculine, feminine, mother, father inside ourselves, and inner child healing, our fragments, and how we can sometimes in traumatic events separate ourselves or we get shattered. And then there's different pieces of us that are lost in that event. And they're what are called significant emotional events. They get trapped along your timeline. And all of these different things, these are things that I'm intuitively picking up in people when I'm talking to them, when I'm hearing their story and what they're struggling with. And I'm able to analyze and pinpoint like, okay, this person has, fragments potentially from an event that maybe looked like this. They had a relationship with their mom and their dad that was, abusive, or, I had a client just share with me recently how her mom treated her in certain ways, and I had to bring it up to her, like, that was very abusive treatment. That was not okay. That was very inappropriate. And now we're having to help her heal in ways that she didn't realize that her mom had treated her this way and that it was inappropriate. So I can intuitively pick up on these things that might come forward, things like negative emotions, where they're trapped in the body. I have an ability to be able to see somebody's body energetically. I don't have to see them physically, but I can scan their body energetically, and I can find where potential emotions or trauma is trapped in the body. And we often do get negative emotions trapped in our body, and that can then lead to physical dis-ease. So I can go through and scan and see, okay, this is showing up here, this is disconnected here, this has been shattered over here, you've got a fragment that needs to be healed and integrated. You're holding on to unforgiveness in your heart. Your stomach has all this anxiety and energy that's been stored in it that is from feeling tons of anxiety from this moment in time. And I'm able to use muscle testing as well to make sure that what I'm picking up intuitively is physically, in alignment with what's really true. So every time that I'm doing this, I'm connecting to the source of all that is, and whatever you believe your God or your source is, I'm also energetically asking you to connect up to that source, right? That's ultimately the way that I believe that we heal. I am not a healer. I don't ever call myself a healer. If I do, it's just for the sake of context and conversation, but I don't actually believe that I am a healer. I am a healing conduit. I am something that healing comes through. You are your healer. You are the one that is able to connect up to the source of all that is, and that can ultimately be open to and give permission to and receive healing. Because ultimately, that which is all is what the ultimate healing source is. And whatever your belief system is, whether that's God, whether that's universe, whether that's source energy, whether it's light, whatever it is for you, that's your source of healing, and that's what I'm connecting you up to. So as I, go through this process of helping people connect up to that, then I'm able to see more clearly. It's almost like a veil gets lifted. And once I have permission, this is something people are like, can you read me? And I'm like, yes, I can, but I need permission. I don't just go around in the world, able to read people. I mean, I can, but I choose not to because I don't have their permission. So I have to ask for people's permission. They must grant me permission. And when that's exchanged, then I can kind of go in and look at what's going on. You can think about it like when you go to a doctor's office or a hospital and you get a bunch of diagnostic tests done. It's kind of like I'm able to do that inside of myself for you to give you a quote unquote diagnosis of what I can see, feel, and hear is going on. I can find if you have attachments, if you have, a loved one that's maybe hanging around you or is trying to get a message through to you, that maybe you're seeing signs everywhere and is like, this is weird, like grandma, I keep feeling like grandma's around, or like I see a hummingbird all the time. Maybe that's her symbol. That was my grandmother's symbol. And, I can connect with those things. That's what my whole story has culminated to, is this integration of, again, that like traditional education part and my intuitive part, my spiritual part and my religious part, like all of these different things. I've always had so many different parts of myself, and they've finally come together to really integrate into this beautiful wholeness that I am really happy and grateful that I can proclaim today. And again, like I said in the beginning, I am not perfect. I am not God. I don't have everything figured out. I still have all my own struggles. Again, I still, sometimes think that I'm unworthy. I sometimes still have imposter syndrome. Like when, I can only imagine the comments on this podcast episode that's like, you don't have a degree and you're not certified in this and you blah, 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 blah. Like you don't have the expertise and you're not an expert and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, sometimes that gets to me. It's hurtful, and it is hard to hear haters and people that are just being mean and, that don't want to just keep things to themselves, that would maybe, be less hurtful if they just kept them to themselves, but they just want to like attack. And I have been very prone to attacks, which is why I've kept myself very small and, for lack of a better term, hidden. I've only built my business off of referrals and through networks of people that I know. I've rarely, if ever, I don't know if I've really ever advertised myself besides maybe like a person like my sister's Instagram or something, right? Like a small community of people. I mostly just work with people that refer me to other people. And now I'm starting to express my voice. So I do recognize that I'm slightly more susceptible to attacks. But when it comes to like healing that imposter syndrome, there's a point in time in your journey where, at least this happened for me, and I think this could be helpful for you, is like, there is a part of your journey where you are allowed to be congruent with who you are, and it might take time. I've had to be patient and wait this out. It was never appropriate timing for me to put myself out there in my 20s. It didn't feel resonant with me, like that same inner calling inside my soul, just like how I knew I had to honor myself by not going the traditional educational path. That same thing happened for me, where I knew that I had to honor the fact that there was so much resistance to putting my voice out there, to advertising myself. It just wasn't the right time. I needed to integrate myself more. I needed to become more congruent with who I really am and feel really solid and grounded and confident in who I am, what my message is, random crazy things that I talk about, like accepting my weird eccentric self and genuinely loving those things about myself, so that when I do, or if I do, which I hope I don't, but if I do get hateful comments or people that are bashing me or that are saying hurtful things to me, then I can it's water off my back. It's like, you know what? I really appreciate that you want to share your opinion, and it's really hurtful, and I'm probably going to go cry about it for a little bit, but I will overcome it because I know who I am. I've found my light and I live in my light. And if you're somebody who wants to attack me, then I'm not the right person for you, and this isn't your message. So please leave me alone, right? Like, I have that conviction to be able to do that eventually once I've overcome the emotion that event probably will create or can create. So anyway, I'm digressing. Let's go back to how I'm helping people get back their light. So there are a lot of things that I can tune into, like I was mentioning: trauma beliefs, trauma stored in your body, trapped emotions, fragments that are missing from you. The analogy I give to help explain that is like a puzzle piece. If you as a whole being, when you were born, was a whole puzzle, as you go through life and certain significant emotional events, there are puzzle pieces that get taken from you or that you give away knowingly or unknowingly. When you experience a traumatic event or a super highly charged emotional event, then those pieces get ripped out from your puzzle and they get stored almost like files in a cabinet along your timeline, and we have to go get back all your pieces and bring them all back together and integrate them back into yourself. There's also a lot of unforgiveness that happens to us as humans. When people wrong us, when people hurt us, that was a big part of my story. I needed to go through a lot of forgiveness, and even just coming to terms with the fact that that was what I needed for healing. So I did a lot of forgiveness, and that's something that people really, really need with their parents, with their siblings, with family members, with coworkers, bosses, anything of the sort, neighbors, friends, whoever it is. Like, I had a client who he didn't really have a ton of hurtful, traumatic things with his parents, but he did with his peers. So we needed to go back and do a lot of forgiveness with certain events, with girls that rejected him or hurt him, and classmates that left him out and that were just ruthlessly mean for no real reason. So in a lot of ways, I am intuitively connecting to what your light is and or was, and figuring out what's been blocking it, or what's extinguishing it, or what took it away from you, or whom you gave it away to. And we're bringing it all back to you. The whole intention is that all of you, in all realities, dimensions, timelines, timeframes, verses in the multi, all come back to you, so that here and now in this present moment, which is really the only thing that exists, which is going to be another podcast episode around like physics and whatnot, but the here and now version of you in this 3-dimensional space is the version of you that is real, that we need to bring all of the parts and pieces to you back home to. That's the whole message of my podcast, of finding home healing and finding that light within yourself and coming home to yourself. It's all of these traumatic events that have potentially hurt you, or that have shattered you, or that are stuck inside of you, like the trauma beliefs, limiting beliefs, negative emotions, all of that, and clearing that crap out so that all of the real and true pieces that are you come back to you. I do believe that once you do that, then things like the imposter syndrome disappear, because that's what's really at the root. We don't have to deal with the imposter syndrome itself. I mean, we could talk that to death, like beating a dead horse, but what's really underneath it is these stories that you have, these trauma beliefs, these negative emotions, the traumatic experiences that took your puzzle pieces away, that made you believe or have these stories of I'm not good enough, or I can't measure up, I can't do it, they're gonna laugh at me, or I need to stay safe, or I'm not safe. Those types of things, those roots need to be healed if we're going to get you back your light. A lot of times people might not even know that their light is out, that's what's really keeping them stuck. So a big part of my value that I can give to people is that I'm helping them see, like, yes, you're stuck. This is where you're stuck. This is what's keeping you stuck. This is what needs to be done in order to get you unstuck. And let's do it. Let's unstick you, right? So there's a lot of processes in that. The most complete version and form of this, I do what I was referring to as a rapid transformation process, where I dive deep into somebody's history and their timeline and how their childhood was and all of that, and what their current belief system is, and basically getting a picture of who they were, who they are, and who they'd like to be, and then clearing out the past, helping them heal in the present so that they can become who they want to be in the future. And I can do that in smaller increments. I also can see people like one-on-one, once a week, or once every 2 weeks, once a month, whatever. That's obviously a much slower process and way to do it, but sometimes that's what's needed. Sometimes clients come to me and they're not ready to do the deep healing, the deep dive. They might not know enough about themselves. They might need to start externally processing and doing more talk therapy to help open up what's going on for them, so that then we can do a lot of those things that I just mentioned. So it all just depends. Every person is different. I don't believe that healing is a one size fits all. I do believe that every individual is different. And whether it is that you're experiencing imposter syndrome, or you're doubting yourself, or you're feeling stuck, like you can't up level to the next part of your life, all of those are just symptoms. They are not the actual problem. They are symptoms for you to see and recognize what the real problem is so that you can go and do your healing, come back home to your light, and live in your light. I'm not claiming that this process is easy. I'm not claiming that it doesn't take time, energy, effort, investment. It does. That's just the truth of it. When we are putting a sole focus of coming back home to ourselves and improving our life, personally and honestly, I think that that's where we find ourselves and what we're meant to do on this planet. Like I told you earlier, I knew that I wanted to help people heal, but I didn't have the knowingness of how I was going to do that. I had to just take each next step and walk the path. And if that's the case for you, in whatever context it is that's happening for you, I would like to encourage you that that's okay. You don't have to know everything. You have to learn to take every next step, take the best next step that you can towards your passion. Again, honoring yourself, listening to your soul. Take the best next step towards your passion. Honor your light, honor who you are, even if it's hard, even if it's scary, even if it's making all of your stories come up to the surface. Like with this podcast, even this episode in general, I had a lot of things to overcome before I recorded this episode. I got an attachment yesterday and I cried and I wasn't expecting it. And I have been delayed in recording this one from, processing even more layers, going back through my whole story and sharing all of this with people and knowing that it's going to be put out into the world. That's terrifying for me. And I've been having to process that. And like I said earlier, remind myself to come back home to myself and why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like Simon Sinek said, your why is what's most important. Why are you doing what you're doing? And my mission is why I'm doing what I'm doing. If you're a type of person who gets chills or that you can feel the lightning bolt of energy when I say my mission, it's because that is energy that I've charged so much to be the thing that I can ground back to be like, this is why I'm doing the scary things. This is why I'm putting myself out there. This is why I'm facing so many of my, residual fears and the layers that I continue to keep healing in myself, because I'm here to help people and I'm here to help you come back home to that light within yourself. Okay. So if any of this is interesting to you, if you would like to work with me one-on-one, you can go to findinghomehealing.com. You can learn more about me there, schedule a time to chat with me. If not, I also have a women's circle that you can join if you would like to just write a message to me about the potential of that. I'll probably have a whole episode about the power and importance of us women gathering together in circle. And otherwise, I hope that these episodes are just really supportive to you. I am going to continue giving you tons of tools and insights and learnings and knowings and knowledge from my past experiences, all of my teachers and all of my trainings, and the knowledge that I've gleaned from countless books and works of art from people who are smarter than I am in lots of different areas and in lots of different ways. I am kind of just like an integrator and an amalgamator, if you will. So I hope this episode has been really helpful and supportive to you. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and we'll see you in the next one. If you loved this episode and or maybe others that you've listened to, please leave a review wherever you're listening to this. Share it with somebody that you think it could help. That's the biggest way you can help me help even more people like us. And if you want one-on-one support, feel free to go to findinghomehealing.com and schedule an intro session with me there. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and we'll see you in the next one.